Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Pickens County Board of County Commissioners special meeting on Thursday, October 29th. I'm Kelly McNicholas Curry, Vice Chair. Commissioner Patty Clapper is here with us, as is County Manager John Peacock, and IT staff helping on Zoom. And commissioners joining from home are our Chair Steve Child, Greg Poshman, and George Newman. And I will turn the meeting over to our Chair Steve Child to run.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everybody. Long time no see. We haven't spent any time together this week at all. So today we are taking a look at the ASE Vision Committee final recommendations, and we have 4 of the points still left to consider and make a decision on. And so I think I'll turn it over to John Peacock for introducing our first subject on item number 12.
Great, thank you, Steve. And I'm going to share my screen here. Give me just a moment. And hopefully everyone can see the screen now.
Yep.
Okay, great. So yes, Steve, as you indicated, we're here today really for the board to have time for discussion. We have a fairly limited presentation, and we're really looking for board direction on the final recommendations that we have not gotten direction on yet. For the ASE Vision Committee report. And that includes recommendation 12, which is reconfiguring the airfield to accommodate aircraft design group 3 aircraft with wingspans greater than 95 feet as long as whether to leave the runway where it is and move the east side taxiway or whether to move the center line of the runway to the west. We had parking lotted an earlier conversation about airline reserved parking because it seemed to fit better with these questions, but that's coming back to us today. And then we have the common ground recommendation airport map, which is, aligned with discussions on phasing. We then also have compiled slides from all of your previous meetings, and they're bullet points on any changes, whether they be additions or changed language. I don't think you've had any deletions to this point. To the ASE vision recommendations that the board has identified. We want to run through and make sure at a high level that we've captured those, and then end by talking about our next steps and public process. So at the very beginning of this process, we talked about this ladder really of reaching agreement, and the vision committee walked through this in this fashion, and the board has, starting with agreement on vision, understanding the goals related to that vision, a set of key findings about this particular project that informed the recommendations. And then as we've been working through, you followed very much a similar process. There have been recommendations that have been really easy, I think, for the board to reach consensus on and agree to. There have been some more challenging conversations, some of the sideways thumbs, if you will, that have led to more recommendations, either additions to language or changes to language. We'll be going over those today. Where you really are today, though, is in the top ones now. And the ones that represent the really hard-earned consensus and decisions and recommendations are the same for this board as they were for the Vision Committee. It's really come down to these same final conversations. And so I just want us to recognize that while we only have a few to go through, these are the challenging ones. And staff is really planning on taking a back seat today and letting the board discuss and ask questions as you seek to build your own consensus around direction to us. And with that, we will jump right in. We've sequenced these because the first question is really, is there any movement of the runway at all that the board wants to recommend or give the staff further direction to explore? The recommendation of the Vision Committee was in fact to reconfigure the airfield to accommodate Airport Design Group 3 aircraft with wingspans greater than 95 feet. But there's a caveat in the Vision Committee's recommendation, and that is a request for ongoing conversations and negotiations with airlines that future fleet mixes will align with the greenhouse gas emissions and growth goals, the three big community goals that were laid out at the beginning of the process. And to see if we could conclude a successful conversation with the airlines serving our community so that we have a better understanding about what the consequences of those changes might be. In terms of the specifics, you can see that a majority of the board, initially agreed to include voluntary noise restriction processes. Everyone agreed to that. At least 4 support the concept of negotiating with the airlines. And then there is a desire for further discussion and dialogue on the separation. I would note that the Vision Committee had originally suggested that these conversations take place fairly quickly, and had laid out a process for us to have conversations, bring the results of those conversations back both to the board and to the Vision Committee to have any final weigh-in but before the board made final recommendations. Of course, on the same day that the Vision Committee voted on these recommendations, we had our first confirmed COVID-19 cases, and that significantly changed the marketplace, our priorities as an organization, and the timing of those discussions, particularly as airline business fell off by between 80 and 90%. The concerns of the airlines have certainly been different over this past year. That does not mean that those conversations cannot move forward still, and that we cannot have those conversations with the airline, but it'll probably be a little bit farther out in the future for us to really sit down for the airlines to understand better what their futures are looking like over the next year or so. So with that, Steve, I would turn it over to the board to weigh in either with thoughts on this recommendation or additional questions.
So, any board members want to weigh in first on your thoughts? And if no one does, then I will. So my thought is, I see that the future of the commercial aircraft coming into Aspen are going to be planes that have a longer wingspan than 95 feet. Because the airlines are going to want to buy those because they are more fuel efficient. They fly better, they're more state-of-the-art airplanes. Now, whether those are electric or hybrid electric or Jet A fuel like our traditional engines, we don't know at this point where that technology is going, but I think that having the ADG-3 runway will accommodate those planes that I think we need to have flying in here to maintain our economy. We are a destination resort. People want to come here from various cities around the country, and having those direct flights on a regional jet seems to have been working pretty well before the COVID virus hit. So I am in favor of increasing the separation between the runway and the taxiway and widening the runway. Doing both of those things makes the airport safer for even the existing aircraft that come here. It gives, in case of an accident, it just gives more leeway for a plane to, maneuver if they're having a hard braking situation on the runway or something goes wrong. It gives them a lot more maneuverability to try to, not run off the runway. And then increases separation between the runway and the taxiway, so a plane is a lot less liable to run into another one if it veers off the runway. Gives an extra margin before it runs into something on the taxiway. In terms of negotiation with the airlines, that's very problematic right now. I mean, I'm totally in favor of it. I don't think that airlines are in any situation where they would want to be negotiating on that right now. They're just struggling to survive. However, I think that negotiating with the FAA is something that we should be doing, and I would add that into the recommendation to be trying to negotiate with the airlines, also negotiating with the FAA to come up with the best plan from their perspective that fits our objectives. So I will stop there for now. Anybody want to weigh in your opinion? Kelly, thank you.
I haven't had quite enough coffee, but I'll take a stab. I will take a stab. So I think, what I'm focused on is the as long as language here. And I think that, our fleet mix report, which was never finalized, is now subject to a very different set of conditions. And I think that, we will need to have a new fleet mix report to inform, these conversations leading into the future after the airlines are in a position to have more recovered from COVID. There's been a lot of discussion about whose crystal ball is accurate with regards to types of planes that will fly in here. And I don't find that to be a particularly productive conversation right now in the context of so much uncertainty. I do think that the very rough crystal ball that says in 30 years the CRJ-7 will have gone away is a fair one. So those larger conclusions related to that plane specifically make sense to me. if we're looking at like the long-term horizon associated with this plan. Now, I think it's very, I think it's crucial that we have these negotiations, both with the FAA and the airlines. And I think we need to build in a decision point in this recommendation that for me says, we will not commit to an airport layout plan or accepting grant assurances until we've had those conversations and have greater information related to the airline's willingness to negotiate with us and an updated fleet mix. So that's where I'm at on this. I accept the recommendation under those conditions with a lot more detail contained in that as long as condition.
Steve?
Patty?
Yeah, I agree with Kelly on the fact that, the airlines don't know what they're doing tomorrow, let alone in 5 years or 10 or 20 or 30. I think Steve's idea or thought about adding in, talk to the FAA should be included here. I think we need to keep them abreast of where we're going when we have a plan and going to the FAA and say, okay, here's the plan. How can you help us get to meet these objectives in this plan? That being said, we need to have a plan. And as far as Kelly's point, how can we really plan a runway? We don't know what the fleet mix is gonna be, whatever, but we do, it's my understanding, we do have to have a new layout plan if we wanna move forward with the terminal, because it's part of it.
And the fleet mix conversation would be part of that also.
Yeah, so we could move that forward quickly because we don't wanna wait 5 years to start discussing building a new terminal. At least I don't wanna wait. So I don't have a problem in that, and I don't have a problem adding FAA to negotiations with airlines. And I don't know if you call it negotiations with with FAA or discussions with FAA. I don't know how to temper that wording. But I do think we're gonna need to move forward with a new layout plan because we're gonna be making changes to the one that's in existence now. And I think that will probably be one of our next steps is to move into that, because we really need to have that before we move into discussions with FAA, would be my understanding. Yeah? So,
It'll go together.
okay. So, yeah, that's kind of where I am as far as this, and for further discussions. But, yeah, and it's hard for us to say as long as airlines agree that, because we can only do so much with the airlines to encourage them to work with us for the future of the airport and how we're going to manage future change in aircraft.
Kelly?
Thank you. I just want to respond to that because, what I'm really concerned about is the information we do have tells us that, noisier, dirtier airplanes will come here if we widen the runway. So, I want a guardrail in there, a position point, a decision point that lets us face, updated info after the airlines, we've had a chance to recover here to say, are we putting that into motion? Or have we succeeded in gaining the agreements we need to prevent that outcome? So if there's alternate ways to put that, guardrail into place, that to me is very important. And I think it honors what the Vision Committee has asked of us.
And Steve, I agree with that, with Kelly's clarification of what I think the two of us are talking about. And I think that's pretty much a given, because by allowing something to continue as it is today is not meeting our goals of reduced emissions, reduced noise, carbon footprint, all of that. So we do need to have that as soon as we know what's going on in the future. And I wish I had that crystal ball. Even a rough one actually would be.
Craig?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate what I'm hearing from Patty and Kelly and you, Steve, as well. You know, I like Kelly. I want to have the full picture, and I want to keep exploring. And I know it's painful and it's been long, but I think it's necessary that we acknowledge the disruption we've seen from the pandemic and the economy and what specifically it has done to the airline industry as we go forward. And so I too want to have a decision point that's farther out, so we have the time to absorb and contemplate the new information that's coming, and including the alternative viewpoints that have been presented to us with options that I think are sound and worth hearing. I don't see a reason to rush for any reason, really. So I think that's something I would insist on. I keep thinking about the if-then aspect of the Vision Committee's recommendation that Kelly brought up. And it was, if, you know, the airlines will agree and the FAA agrees, then we build this airport in the way that we're recommending. And I had the opportunity to ask John Bennett, you know, what does this if then mean? What do we do if we can't reach those negotiations, if we can't move forward? And he said very, you know, maybe he was in a hurry, or maybe it was just a quip intended for me only, but he said, then pull the plug, in an email to me. And I take that seriously. What I don't think he was saying abandon the whole thing. What he was saying is we have to go back and look at what the options are, and look at you know, re-examine all the assumptions we've made, because we are making a lot of assumptions about how quickly the airline industry will change, how quickly the airline industry will clean itself up, when honestly we're making assumptions that certain airlines will even be in business. The fact of the matter that we still can go on is we still have our goals for the community regarding safety, regarding clean aircraft, regarding noise, clean air, and not building something bigger than what we need. So if we were to take those goals and embrace those goals and go to the FAA and really work to bring them in as an ally toward those goals, with all options on the table about how we would achieve that, I think that's the way forward. We have this incredible document from the Vision Committee that I want to respect everything they've done, while also understanding that the ground under our feet has changed with what's happened in the airline industry since that report was finished. So yes, I do want to move forward. I would say that the ADG-3 aircraft wider wingspans is still a daunting scenario, but it seems as if, you know, previously that's the way things were going, and it would make sense to start designing for that, knowing that it's going to take a full decade before we can even do that. And I'm grateful for the time of having that decade. And I'm also grateful for the pause that the pandemic has brought us, so we can reassess what's happening, because I know we're not going to have cleaner aircraft within the next decade. It just doesn't seem likely. So where does that leave me? It leaves me willing to move forward, but also receptive to the new information we're hearing and seeking, and with some way of having the decision point that Kelly speaks of, so that after this is all said and done, we can still decide how we're going to move. I want to point out that I went on a tour of the airport a couple days ago after recording a voiceover for their audio system, and I was incredibly impressed on what I saw as the updates made to the terminal. Rich, you and your team have done an incredible job. Caroline gave me the A quality tour of the place, and I was incredibly impressed with what I saw. And I have to say, I'm proud of our airport now as it is. It doesn't need to be torn down immediately and rebuilt something new. We could make this terminal go for a few more years, as we'll have to. And I think we've solved several of the problems that we had with it. And so I want to say kudos to everybody, especially when we're looking at the lower passenger numbers we've seen in the commercial aviation. So I think we can afford to take a breath and revisit our assumptions and look where we're going. And I'll stop there. Sorry for rambling. Maybe I haven't had enough coffee yet either.
Steve, could I get a point
I
of
could use some more
clarification?
also. Patty?
Yeah, Greg, I'm confused, because I heard you saying two different things. At least, maybe I don't drink coffee. Maybe that's a problem for me. And I'm not going to start now. But I heard you say stop and take a breath, but move forward. So we have to have a plan if we're going to, then the plan has to include everything, a new layout plan, if we're going to move forward with just about anything we want to do there, especially if we want to start working on the new terminal and kind of watch what unfolds as far as runway needs. But we have to have a plan. So we do have to move forward with coming up with a decision. To me, it doesn't mean that as things unfold in the future with the airline industry, and which is such a big unknown, that that plan cannot be tweaked in the future based on new information, new technology as it comes forward. But we do, at the end of the day, here sitting at this table with sitting at your tables and this table, have a plan that's on the record that we can take to FAA and to the airlines for negotiations and discussion. Am I correct on that?
Patty, I have to say, I think that, yes, I'm willing to move forward with the plan, but I also think that we need to question the assumptions we've made and make sure that we certainly have our goals in alignment, and I believe we do. I think we all agree on what the ultimate goals are as we go forward. So when you say plan, yes, plan to move forward, plan to keep working toward an upgraded airport. And clearly we're not ready to start talking about the specific design, I don't think. Regarding the runway itself, I guess I want to be reassured that leaving the runway in place is actually going to save us as much money and time as we've heard. It sounded like the right thing to do to me. I know there are differing opinions on whether or not that's the best way to move forward. Maybe it would actually save a lot of buildings and reconfiguration and give us more space if we did move the runway. I think that conversation has been had, but I wouldn't mind revisiting it. So, yeah, I'm moving forward hesitatingly, but I also want to keep I want to have my hand on the ripcord so I can bail if at the last minute, if it doesn't seem right. I want an out. So I'm trying to figure that one out.
Well, Steve, let me just clarify with Greg in this conversation. Greg, I think the ongoing conversation, as I said, it's ongoing conversation about the runway and the technology and the types of fleet mix. I don't think that's a given, because it's maybe slowed down now because of COVID, but it's gonna gear back up again, and I think we definitely need to keep that door wide open so we can evaluate what's coming forward in the future. I think we would be remiss if we did not do that. I don't think the board has any intention of not keeping that door open and for future discussions when technology starts to really be more clear to us.
I think it might be.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone's too far apart here. Just a reminder, the purpose of this document, this is not an FAA-driven document. It's not an authoritative document. It's kind of going back to that Alice in Wonderland slide, if you remember that this is an opportunity for us as a community to really establish what is our North Star, what is the destination. And then we're going to figure out how to get there. And just like any journey, we're probably going to experience some unexpecteds in here that will drive ongoing conversation with this board. Ultimately, this board is the decision maker. You are the airport owner. And so as either new information or we get the results of these conversations that we're talking about, the board is going to have several decision points over the next couple years before there's a shovel in dirt, frankly. And the idea here is to make sure that staff knows the direction the board wants to go, so that we can, start having the right conversations. And that's the purpose of this document. And that the board knows where the community wants to go, which was the purpose of the larger visioning process.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll get to you in a second, George. Just to remind you, Greg, that we are discussing the location of the runway is the next item. We haven't gotten to that yet. That's item number 13. So we will get to that very shortly. So George next, and then we'll get to you, Kelly.
I think they all run together, even though it's segmented out. And I just go back to the very beginning, 15 months ago, the 4 aspirational goals: safety on the ground and in the air, reduce emissions by at least 30%, reduce noise by at least 30%, manage growth towards a 0.8% airplane employment target. So those are the goals that everyone has agreed on. And so what I struggle with, and I agree with a lot that I've heard, I think if we want to address those key goals, then status quo really doesn't work, right? At least it doesn't work for me. I don't think it works for the rest of the community. So we need to move forward. We need to move forward cautiously. I agree with you, Greg. We need to question the assumptions because they are changing. We need to have an updated fleet study, as Kelly has suggested. I still struggle with the terminology, and I said this weeks ago, as long as. What we need to do is engage the airlines, engage the FAA in these discussions, let them know where our community values are, and see how we can get to that agreement. But the way this is written, it's either yay or nay, and that doesn't move our community goals forward at all. I've seen the letters and the emails and everything else in terms of let's take a pause. And I think this is an opportunity to do both. It's an opportunity to be able to move forward in terms of trying to achieve our goals, but allow a pause time to address that. And what I mean by that is if we agree to move forward with the common ground recommendations in terms of leaving the runway where it is, that leads into a whole series of future discussions and decisions that will need to be made, starting with the FAA. As we saw last time we met, issues that the FAA would have to agree with if we were to keep that runway in place would include the relocation of the tower, probably a new EA or at least an amended EA, looking at that T-cup at the end of the runway, if that's going to be acceptable for safety. That whole process is at least a year and maybe even longer. And during that time, the board would have the opportunity to continue to work, hopefully the next year, with the airlines, certainly with the FAA, and being able to continue to look at updated information that we're looking at. So for me, it's a yes and, to paraphrase John's. Yes, we can move forward, and we can allow the time that is going to be needed to work with the FAA and see if this is actually going to be feasible. And then if it's not going to be feasible, then it's a time to sort of rethink this whole process, bring back those committee members, and relook at how else can we move forward. You know, the terminal, I've been out at the terminal as well, and it's still a Band-Aid, Greg. Yes, it's working because we've opened up spaces, we've moved our admin out, but we've done very little in terms of the back room operations for staff, for the airline staff, for the luggage areas. We've done very little, nothing in terms of the slope of the ramp that floods the terminal. So we all know that we need a new terminal, and that will take several years as well. But it's part of this overall plan. So I guess I agree. We need to move forward. We need to question the assumptions. We need to start those conversations with the FAA and see if it's even feasible to look at maintaining the existing runway where it is and being able to shuttle and move the other infrastructure around that needs to happen for that to work.
Steve, if I could respond, I think I certainly agree with George on that. That does make sense. I certainly acknowledge that the terminal is not optimal, but I also think that the work that we've done on it, we did expand the luggage storage area. We've expanded the waiting areas. The staff area is probably still a deplorable situation, I'm sure, but I'm sure they're making the best of it. But yes, I agree with that. What I'm concerned about, and I guess I just need the reassurance, say we say, okay, we're going to, I guess we're talking about reconfiguring an airfield. Where the runway goes isn't a decision we're going to be making right now. Say we say we're going to leave it in place. We go through a process with the FAA and they say, you certainly can't, it doesn't make sense, or we find out it doesn't make sense economically or logistically. We still have the option to pivot back to not moving it or moving it, whichever the option is. So we still maintain those options. I like that. And so I'm happy with and comfortable with that. What we've got is a plan that's adaptable enough, as it should be in these uncertain times. The one issue that George brought up, which I didn't think we had a total agreement on, was just the 0.8% enplanement target. I know we had a discussion about it, but I don't recall us settling on 0.8% completely, and refresh my memory, but I didn't think, I wasn't prepared to accept that personally.
Right. What I was mentioning, Greg, was just the 4 aspirational goals that were brought forth by our working committees. Those were the goals that they brought forward to us. That's what I was referring to.
Got it. Right. I remember that, and I certainly agree with most of them. Just regardless, what we set our growth target for was a question that I had. And so I don't think that conversation's completely done, but I'll agree with the rest of them, certainly.
And I'm sorry if I keep on jumping in here, Steve, but when we had that discussion, that was relating to the number of gates. And I think we've allowed that flexibility, the way we've worded that gates, anywhere from 6 to 8. So again, those are decisions that don't need to be made anytime in the short term, but we've allowed that flexibility for future information to come forward.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that. If we articulate it in that way, then I'm certainly comfortable with it.
And I'll just remind everyone, we're going to try and go back through each one of them today so that the board has a chance to weigh in whether we captured your understanding correctly. Time allowing.
I was going to say today.
Okay, Kelly.
Thanks. Yeah, more on this topic. So I agree with Greg that we do, we are, I don't know, I guess privileged with some flexibility here in what's been proposed to us. And, I'm pretty focused on the mechanisms and stopgaps. And, I'll just say that because I don't want our vision plan to take on more momentum than we're able to ratchet back when we need to. So I'll just throw out maybe a question that as we get through these other three, we can revisit later. And that would be, can we do an airport layout plan that lets us move the taxiway and therefore start to work on some of the other improvements that we want to see more expeditiously while keeping the runway as it is until we know and have enough information to decide whether the widening of the runway is something we're committing to or not. So that's a question I have that also requires us to agree on a couple of other points in the next discussions. And then I also just want to, maybe suggest that we reformulate some of the language here. When I'm looking at as long as airlines agree, to me that's sort of outsourcing some of our power a little bit. Like I feel like maybe we should say as long as the BOCC can assure, because that gives us a wider range of opportunities for negotiations and players to, and also puts the onus on us to be the ones to say, as long as we have the power to decide what we want. So I'll just offer that as an edit.
Okay, Steve?
So weighing in on the idea of putting our decision point out into the future, I have reiterated that idea recently in campaign stuff, that we need to build the terminal first. That's our most pressing need. The long-range goal, my understanding is, with the airport layout plan, we are committed to an ALP or ADG 3 runway right now. Is that correct, John, on our current layout plan?
Yeah, the current airport layout plan is reflective of what was approved in the environmental assessment.
So how we get to there, we're committed to that right now. We can't be accepting FAA money for the terminal and then get down the road and say, oh, we changed our mind, we don't want an ADG 3 runway. They would probably make us pay back the money they gave us for the terminal at that point, if I understand correctly. But being able to put out the decision point to sometime in the future, and it looks like we wouldn't get the runway stuff until 10 years from now anyhow. That gives us time to be talking to the airlines, be working our way through the timeline that Rich had laid out for us, and maybe still being able to negotiate more with the FAA and maybe change things in the future based on the state of affairs of the airline industry and all that sort of thing. So, George.
Well, John, correct me, but what I understand is the idea for us to be able to work on the terminal depends on which layout plan we choose. And so, because as Rich showed us earlier, there is a phasing, and you can't do one without the other. So, maybe refresh our memory. And the other thing is, the FAA, in terms of funding for the terminal, is really very, very small, limited, relatively to the airfield. That's where the grants come in for the airfield, not for the terminal.
Yeah, George, and I'm going to try and answer two questions here, yours, and I'm going to try and circle back to Kelly's that she asked earlier also. So you're correct. In order to finalize an airport layout plan, and just to be clear what that really is a space reservation for uses. And so how we reserve space for uses, particularly on the east side of the airport, is highly dependent on where the runway is going to be. And so it is very, very difficult for us it's impossible for us to have a meaningful conversation with the FAA about potential changes to the airport layout plan without knowing where the board wants to go first. We need that starting point. And then to the point that a lot of you have made, depending on what that response is and such, will drive further conversation. From a process perspective, airports typically update long-term master plans every 5 to 7 years. So we're actually due anyway for that. And as part of that process, I think going back to Kelly, your question, you go through a lot of those projections again. So what is the fleet mix? What is the design aircraft likely to be, and that sort of thing. And the Board of County Commissioners has to approve that airport layout plan before it is submitted for formal approval by the FAA. Now, typically in developing an airport layout plan, you're having those conversations, right? And so depending on what direction we get from the board today, because the questions you're answering today probably have the biggest impact on that airport layout plan process. If the board decides to go to Airport Design Group 3 or to pursue that option, and then to move the runway 80 feet, that is a project we know has already been approved through the FAA. And so that process and those discussions are going to look really different than the discussions about leaving the runway where it is and moving the taxiway, which would require further conversations with the FAA. But to even put a potential space reservation on the table, as we've drawn out for you, we need to know that's the direction the board would want to go. And so the board is going to have, that is probably the biggest touch point or bumper, I think, Kelly, that you were asking for, is really that airport layout plan. As soon as we start accepting funds towards design and those sorts of things, I think we start to get into those grant assurance questions. So the big conversation is really what happens with the airport layout plan. And both would require some amendments, right? Because if the board approves the ICAO parking and the additional parking to the north, we'd still need to do at least some amendment to our airport layout plan and probably some amendment to our NEPA document. If we leave the runway where it is and we do west side, those processes will be more significant and probably take longer. Does that kind of answer your question? And George, your question?
Yeah, thanks. I was just trying to help clarify that for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, we've heard that before. I think, you know, I just think for me, we need to sort of commit that we are going to like revisit that before this all gets put into place.
And I think that process allows it, as John just laid out.
Steve?
Yeah, Patty.
Yeah, getting back to Kelly's language issue, with the airlines agree that, yeah, that's putting a lot of power into the hands of the airlines. So I don't know how we can blend that. Airlines and BOCC agree, or airlines agree with BOCC, or some kind of language change. I'm not quite sure how to get to where you want to go that I'm comfortable with as far as, yeah, wording. But I do agree that it should not be in the airlines ballpark. We should both be in there playing together. So I'm not quite sure what language we want to do, but I think some.
Well, and I also, we don't know if having greater conversations with the FAA will create a space that helps us get there too.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just think we can broaden the language to, one, it's our plan, the responsibility is on us to the community, not on the airlines to the community. So I just think we should make that clear, and I don't think we need to, sort of isolate how we get there.
Yeah, so I'm just not sure what wording to use, but I do think we need to tweak it.
George, then Greg.
Yeah, I think we just want to clarify, as both of you said, that the BOCC will enter negotiations with the airlines and with the FAA and ultimately we'll leave it up to BOCC to assure that these goals are met. I mean, I don't want to wordsmith it today, but that's, for me, we're just making a statement that we are committed to negotiate to engage both the airlines and the FAA, and that the ultimate decision will be up to the BOCC.
Craig?
Yeah, I think I was going the same place George was. To me, it seemed like we could say, as long as the airlines agree to our stated goals, which are reflected in the following text, but I'd leave it to the wordsmiths to sort that out. But I appreciate that you're wanting it to be reflective of our, our ability to make that decision.
So this kind of goes into the next question, if we leave the runway there and move the taxiway over. If we followed that track, that would unleash a long series of steps we would be doing on the east side to move things over, move the general aviation over to the west side, all the various small incremental changes we would do along the way, with the very last thing happening being the actual widening of the runway. Is that correct, John? That would be the last step we would do?
Yeah, the buildings definitely have to be moved prior to the center line of the taxiway being moved, and so we'd anticipate that work happening along with creating the additional ramp space on the west side to provide a relief valve for the parking that will be lost during construction. And so that would include the terminal, and so the actual widening of the runway would be put towards the end.
And we wouldn't become a full ADG-3 airport until the runway was widened. Is that correct?
It's
The
really
last step we're doing actually, or would we already be just because of the separation?
Yeah, and so I think we need to get clarification through FAA on that, but certainly the separation is the most important part, followed by the widening. But certainly to meet all the standards, you're correct, Steve, that wouldn't occur until the runway was widened and strengthened.
So my point being that, in terms of negotiating with the airlines, maybe it's 10 years down the road. Before we take that last final step, there probably would be some aircraft, they would not fly in here because we hadn't actually rebuilt the runway yet, or hadn't widened it and maybe strengthened it. That would still be limiting the type of aircraft that could fly in here. So we still would have negotiating power, in a sense, with the airlines pretty far down in the process of our construction.
Yeah, I would caution, I just want to be clear that I think as the FAA provides design grants and engineering grants tied to the project, which would be earlier on in the process, their expectation is that the project is brought to the conclusion that they approved. And so that's why I think the airport layout plan piece is really more of that critical milestone. I don't want to leave the board with the impression that you can change directions for sure on a project that you've accepted grant dollars on for design several years earlier. I wish I could.
Okay, and you had said that before, John, but thanks for reiterating that.
Mm-hmm.
Really, our decision point is the airport layout plan that we're taking to the FAA, whether it's, moving the runway over or leaving it where it is. We have to be telling the FAA that and then moving forward.
Right.
So the wording that was proposed, I like all the different changes in the wording that have kind of been proposed in terms of the negotiations with the airlines and with the FAA, and putting the power more back into our hands, the BOCC's hands, than the airlines' hands.
So Steve,
Greg?
would it? Oh, sorry.
I lost my, sorry, I'll get it back here. I just lost my train of thought. Go ahead, John.
Okay, sorry, Greg. I hope my interruption didn't cause that. What I was going to suggest is before we leave number 12, that we have Rich and GR been listening in, taking notes. I think to recap the changes that we heard, because there's a lot of conversation in there, would be good, and then we can move on. And hopefully, Greg, that gave you time to remember what you're going to say.
Yeah, I was fairly comfortable with what I'd heard previously regarding the rationale for saving time and money with leaving the runway where it is. I also think that, and as I understand, it would require a new EA, so that's a pause that's built in that may actually benefit us. So I'm comfortable with moving forward with that. I just wanted to be reassured. I'd heard, someone else who's an observer that hasn't weighed in yet just said, it might make more sense to really consider moving the runway. And I thought, wow, I want to be certain once again of all the information given us on leaving it alone where it is. If we leave it alone, leave it where it is, and it puts that much more of an expense on moving the tower and reconfiguring on the east side, is it truly less expensive? So that's what I was just looking for reassurance there.
And I don't think it's necessarily less expensive of an option. It does reduce, it's a less expensive construction option on the runway, and it reduces the amount of time that we would anticipate or project the airport would need to be closed. When you take the total cost of the facility replacements and movement and that sort of thing, it's more expensive, and it includes, though, all of the environmental types of infrastructure which weren't included in our original. So that's part of the cost delta too. And I'm going to suggest, because I think I can feel the board's ready to move on, Greg, to that question. Are you okay if we just take a step back and I ask Rich to kind of recap what we've heard and make sure we've captured it correctly?
Steve, before we do that, we forgot one thing on reconvene
Patty.
vision committee. We were going to add in there or new airport advisory committee.
Oh, okay.
Because we weren't sure by the time we get to that if we'd already have established, so we wanted to leave that option up there.
Yep.
So we wanted to add that in, and these are from my notes from last time we met. So that was a point on that last bullet point.
Thanks, Patty. Rich, is it have I given you enough time to pivot to you for a recap?
I'm gonna give it a stab here.
Okay.
Again, I think we've captured your thoughts, and we can certainly wordsmith it a little bit more before we come out with the final document. But we'll make note of Patty's last mention there. But what I've heard, and GR, you can help me here, is that the BOCC agrees to move forward. You talked about changing the as long as, but it really is a yes and, rather than as long as, which includes flexibility and or stopgap as needed as it moves forward. These points that really are kind of non-negotiable the way it's written, as long as, are really the starting discussion points now for greenhouse gas emissions, lower than what we have, quieter, seating, and also the pound. So those are kind of the starting discussion points. You've requested an updated fleet study. You want to include the FAA in these discussions. You also agreed that, or I heard agreement on changing as long as the airlines agreed to, as long as the BOCC agrees, which puts that final making or decision making into your hands. And then it seems, and again, we'll get into this in a minute, but it seems there's consensus, the desire to do the runway as far out as possible to enable a pivot decision points with new information as evolves over time. The FAA and the airlines, certainly our discussions with them will help inform the BOCC on a future path forward. So that's what I have captured. I don't know if GR, if you've got anything in addition.
I didn't have anything in addition to that.
Steve?
Is it close?
Patty?
Yeah, I think the wordsmithing on the agrees that still, we'll see what comes out of that discussion. But I also have another note on here, and I'm not quite sure what it means, about airline reserve parking. Were we moving it from somewhere else into this section?
Yeah, it was recommendation number 5, and I think the board wanted to consider that with
With
the
12?
separation, 12 and 13. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll
So it's
get,
actually next.
so we'll get to that at
Or
some
11.
point in our,
Yeah.
maybe, okay, just from my notes.
Yeah, it'll come after the next one.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Steve, Greg here. If I could, just want to circle back and regarding I'm wondering if I'm hearing something different here. On number 12, as long as airlines agree, or reach agreement with the BOCC regarding our goals, I think is the intent that I was looking for. I want to make sure we're still on that. That's kind of the gist of the whole thing. We really are trying to negotiate and get the airlines and the FAA to go along with our specifications for the airport, and I want to make sure that's reflected in more succinctly and better than I've just tried it. But it's almost like as long as the airlines agree with us, I think it's implied that they're agreeing, but they're agreeing with us and our goals. Is that what the others think as well?
I would say, first of all, yes, I think that would be true. That leaves the power in our hands. If they don't agree with us, maybe we at that point in time, it might not be we, it might be, future board decides to just go back to the ADG2 airport and do the shuttles from the Denver airport, basically, or from the Grand Junction airport or something with smaller aircraft. Might be our only option at that point, if the airlines just totally didn't agree. I think that's what Don Bennett was kind of implying when he said pull the plug on it if they don't agree to that.
I don't want to put words in John Bennett's mouth, but I don't think he was saying that we would continue to just be a class 2 field. But Greg, I think I understand what you're saying. I think we're all in agreement. I just think that we'll just wait for staff to consolidate these thoughts and clean it up and bring it back to us.
That's fine with me. I think that's satisfactory. I just want to make sure I understood.
Again, I think that the overall intent is for the board to be in the driver's seat at the end of this. So I think we can help you there.
And I'll
Kelly?
just jump in to clarify, it's for the board to be in the driver's seat, but also for us to broaden our approach as to how we would negotiate this. So, airlines, FAA, whether some other third path emerges that we don't know, it doesn't, it just says that we're the ones responsible for these conversations with any parties that have a play in it. And, based on the assurances that we are going to make.
So wordsmith it.
So John, George did bring up a point. What happens if we don't? This is looking from the FAA point of view. If we decided to not do these changes because the airlines just couldn't agree to that, we decided we don't want to increase the separation between the taxiway and the runway for financial reasons, whatever reasons. The way I see it, the FAA would reduce our modification of standards. They would say, I don't know. That's what I was referring to, going back to a design group 2 runway. That might be the default thing that would happen if we didn't move forward with the ADG 3 runway. Isn't that
So,
correct?
yeah, so Steve,
Reading on what the FAA would do?
there's not a lot of precedent for us to fall back on this. The FAA has represented to us that they're now reviewing modifications every 5 to 7 years to see if modifications will be reissued. We haven't had a specific conversation around that process. And so if we refuse to do anything, it's very possible that the FAA would leave our 95-foot wingspan intact. And if that were the case, then we would be limited right now to the CRJ 700 for its useful life. As airline fleets switch, I think we project fewer commercial airlines probably being able to serve the airport. The most likely response of the FAA would be to pull grant funding for future maintenance and or capital improvements. That is something that the FAA has relayed would be a likely outcome of staying put at this point. And so the maintenance and any improvements would likely fall on local revenue sources. Some of the privatization discussions have really been around, private funding sources, I think, to cover those costs if the FAA wouldn't, with the ability of a private entity then to use the airport to provide services. So that's one outcome. If the FAA, in fact, it does have a new process where they will be reconsidering the modifications every 5 to 7 years and determine that we don't meet full Group 3, it is possible that they could remove that modification to standard, in which case we would be a Group 2, an airport design Group 2. I would note that the CRJ 700 actually is an ADG 2 aircraft. I believe. So it would put us in the probably same profile commercially and timeline-wise.
Okay, so that's sort of a do-nothing alternative that we could have, like, to compare
And-
apples to apples on doing these steps, or doing nothing actually does have consequences that you've laid out what those might be.
And I want to
Right
note there's other consequences that the Vision Committee, because the Vision Committee considered bookend options, and those bookend options were exactly what we're talking about. Not doing anything with the airfield was one bookend. On the other end was the full EA development. And then, the Vision Committee came to the conclusion that neither were right for the community. The EA was too large and didn't have enough safeguards for community character. On the other end, on do nothing, the Vision Committee determined it didn't move the needle on the community's goals. It didn't provide the opportunity to reduce the emissions, reduce the noise. It really would maintain the status quo. And so they shot for a recommendation that was in between those bookends, which is what's in front of you.
George?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I mean, time is on our side on this, because we know that the CRJs are not going away tomorrow. We've got several years that they'll continue to be servicing us. And so that gives us the time to, again, going back to number 12, it gives us a time to engage and negotiate with the airlines, see if the FAA will even consider leaving the runway where it is with a new airport layout plan, and go from there. I mean, again, no one has this crystal ball, but we have the time, and some of these decisions will sort of fall in place based on our future conversations with the airlines and the FAA.
So just a check-in again, I think, whether we've got... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
So I was just saying, and I'm sorry I was muted when I started talking.
Oh.
Feel like we've reached a pretty good point on the wording that still needs some wordsmithing, and on the concept. I think we're all pretty much on the same page in agreement, and it's not completely what the ASE Vision Committee recommended. It's with our own take on it, with some modifications to make it more acceptable to us. But it gives us a path forward as I see it. George?
And I think it will still address the intent of the Vision Committee. I don't think they're going to argue with our changes on this. It still addresses their concerns, the issues, and what they are striving for.
So, John, do we want to move on to number 13 at this point? I think we probably should. It's intertwined with number 12 anyhow, and we'll probably go back and forth a little bit still.
Absolutely. So this recommendation from the Vision Committee really grew out of a concern about moving the center line of the runway closer to Shale Bluffs. I think you've heard in previous presentations in terms of the landing the planes and such, that there was not a technical concern from a approach perspective, but I think more of a common sense concern from the Vision Committee that from a safety perspective, keeping the runway as far away from shale bluffs in that approach as possible would be beneficial. It then expanded into looking at the relative benefits of having a shorter period where the airfield would be shut down for construction. One season versus 2 seasons, and we can go into that a little bit more. I would note for the board that it's not designed. So this is asking our engineering firm to take a look and look at what they thought the relative construction timeframes and such needed for the EA option versus the Vision Committee option were, and that was their relative comparison. I just want to leave some room that as you get into design and geotech and understanding all of that, we all know things can change. So I just want to throw that caveat out there. But it's a relative piece. The runway itself, I'll just finish up. I see your hand going up there, Greg. The runway itself would come at a lower cost, leaving it where it is, because there's not quite as much groundwork and base work and that sort of thing. However, the overall cost of the project with the west side excavation and the additional facilities that need to be relocated and built is actually slightly more.
Steve? Greg? Yeah, so I think an interesting way to look at this may be just if we could get a handle on what's the opportunity cost of losing a season of use of the airport. What are we gaining and what's the value of that? I think that could help us inform our argument or our discussion, at least with the community, on why we think that's the way to go. I'd love to know, how do we determine the cost of losing the use of our airport for an extra season?
Yeah, and Greg, I think the pandemic has provided an interesting opportunity for us to look at that, because obviously construction wouldn't be taking place in the winter months. It would be in the shoulder seasons and, of course, summer months as little as possible. We essentially had an 80 or 90% shutdown during those periods. It's been gradually coming back. I think, Rich, we're probably running about 40% of normal right now, but is that right? Not
yeah, but
even that high.
it's the anticipation is that we're going to be almost where we were at levels last year, just slightly under the winter season. But it's starting to come back up.
But in terms of looking at the window, Greg, I think as we get better measures of the impacts from the summer, now you have the pandemic layered on top of it. But we know that people were not primarily getting here through the airport this summer, right? They were coming via Highway 82 or Independence Pass and 24. And that is how most people came to our community. Now, those numbers overall are down. We know that from bookings and such, although town still seems fairly busy. So we may have an opportunity. Gabe Preston is doing those economic indicators related to COVID, and so as that data catches up over the next few months, we may be able to give a better picture. We kind of have an unintended experiment here on that front.
Okay, Kelly first and then George.
Okay. So Greg, I'll offer how I've sort of wrestled with this, and I'll ask staff to challenge any assumptions if I've relied on them incorrectly. So I really brought up the question of if we leave if we move the runway as the EA says, what does that do to the overall project in terms of full scope, right? More concrete, more money, or not? as opposed to this proposal, which is to leave the runway here. And, you know, leaving the runway results in a more expensive project that potentially has more concrete associated with it, even though we do see some gaining, some savings by keeping the runway where it is. And then the difference between, you know, is it one construction season to leave the runway where it is versus two for moving the runway 80 feet? And, you know, there's a difference in cost, right? It's more expensive to leave the runway where it is. But then I started to try and understand, well, you know, where is that money coming from? You know, it's not funny money, it's real money, right? But which pocket does it come out of? And, you know, looking at leaving the runway where it is, you know, that expense will come from the grants and the fees that we rely on to pay for the project, while looking at a less expensive project to move the runway, I think takes more money out of our community's pocket, out of families' pockets, out of people whose, you know, jobs reduce due to that disruption. So while there is like very real differences in costs, I think whose pocket those costs come out of matter to me, and, you know, which has led me to support leaving the runway where it is because of that fact.
Great, thanks for articulating that, Kelly. I think you're spot on there, and I'd look to Gabe and John and Rich and the crew for reassurance, but I hear what you're saying and I agree.
Am I up, Steve?
Yeah, George.
Yeah. As John stated, and we can look at numbers from Snowmass or from the chamber. The majority of our business in the summer months is driving. The majority of our business in the wintertime is flying, and that's been historically true. And so and it's probably incremental difference. I wouldn't get too hung up on the cost of the differential. It's more of a question of what we think is best for the community in the long run in meeting and achieving our goals and being able to phase in the project, knowing some of the hurdles we're going to have to overcome. We could probably, Rich, you probably sort of look at Eagle County because they had to close their airport for at least 1 or 2 seasons when they built. You may have some information there. And Greg, this is actually sort of a blessing for you because it's going to slow down the growth rate for that time period. But it's not going to deter people from coming. We'll just have more people coming through Denver or Junction during this time period. So again, it all ultimately it's will depend on the FAA whether they're going to agree to some of these needs to allow this runway to stay where it is. Relocation of the tower is going to be a big one. The teacup scenario is going to be a big one. So we don't know that until we decide to present this to the FAA with a new airport layout plan and see what happens. And we've got the time on our side to figure this all out.
Thanks, George. I agree on that.
Couple of thoughts that I've had, and I've been generally more in favor of moving the runway over 80 feet than leaving it where it is, just to put that out front. And one big concern I have, if we do the cross runway taxiway by leaving the runway where it is, that's something the FAA might say, no, you can't do that. If we just plan on moving the runway over like we already have approved, there wouldn't be a cross runway taxiway. We keep all the tarmac parking over on the east side. All the buildings besides the AOC would be on the east side. And so it kind of simplifies our planning in a sense. And it is already approved by the FAA, so that safety issue of the cross runway taxiway is a concern. We could have an accident, like of somebody getting one plane T-boning another one just completely by accident, but that would be horrific if that did happen. Couple thoughts. One, if during the closure time, I see a viable alternative for air travel would be to divert planes that would be coming to Aspen would go to the Eagle Airport, the commercial ones, and we would set up a bus system going from the Eagle Airport to town or to wherever, location for dropping people off. And that way we could kind of keep the air travel going, but we'd have to use the Eagle Airport as an alternative and just do ground transportation from there. And I think that would really be a viable alternative for, even if it's 2 construction seasons, we could maybe minimize the impact on the shutdown of our airport by doing that. The second and last thought would be, and I think it's an engineering question about how much work can be being done, like just the groundwork, if runway were being moved over. I don't know if any could be done without shutting runway down, but maybe shutting it down during shoulder seasons when there's not nearly as much air traffic anyhow, and maybe we could accomplish a lot of the groundwork without having to shut down at all during a summer season. And I don't know how much groundwork you can actually do and keep it safe for the planes landing on the runway. If they went off the runway and you had dug a big trench there that you're filling in with some earth-moving stuff, that might not be allowed, I don't know. But that's a consideration.
Yeah, Stephen, I think, that we'd be getting into design elements, but I think you're right in that even when these estimates were being put together, Kimley Horn was looking at how much work could be done outside of that object-free area that doesn't require that closure, because there is excavation and work that would be happening outside of that. It's really, once you're in that object-free area, that's where you have restricted airplane movements.
Steve, you're muted again. There you go.
No, I wasn't trying to talk, but just looking for hands. Where is everybody on this? Let's do a straw poll in terms of moving the runway or leaving it where it is. What's everybody's gut feeling for a starting point on that? George?
Yeah, I would leave it where it is right now. That was a recommendation from the Common Ground, and it allows us the time to start these negotiations with the FAA, certainly, almost immediately, and see what they're going to require and see what their thoughts are. It may go somewhere, it may go nowhere, but we won't know unless we pursue this option.
Kelly?
Yeah, I support leaving it where it is, and, I think we know this needs to be vetted, right, for the safety concerns, et cetera. I'm less committed to immediately building the parking on the west side. I think, I'd like us to have more baseline data from the FBO before we commit to that. So reserving it as space is totally fine, but automatically putting parking over there without a little more vetting, I'm less interested in, or supportive of, I should say.
Patty?
Yeah, as I think I said at our last meeting, I am supportive of leaving it where it is, doing the new layout plan. I think one of the key things for me is it enables us to do more of the environmental improvements that I think we all support. And that new parking system, it needs to be part of it. I always forget the acronym for it.
That's coming up next, ICAO.
Okay. So that being part of it, and definitely the phasing, I know logistically, as far as construction, the runway probably makes better sense to do that first, but I am totally supportive of getting a new terminal to the airport. I'm working on that as soon as we can, because what's out there now is just not acceptable to the people who work there, the people who come and go from there. It's just not acceptable to our community and not to me. So that's the direction I'm going in at this point.
Greg?
Yeah, I agree with what I've heard from George and Kelly and Patty. I think that seems to be the smart way forward, and of course, we'll be nimble when we get feedback from the FAA and whomever else.
So I see, I'm outvoted 4-1. I go along, we got to make leaving the runway where it is work, because that's where most of the sentiment and the ASE Vision Committee wants it there. So a couple of thoughts on that. The negotiation with FAA is critical, obviously, on this. They might say things to us in our negotiations with them that indicate, well, we just have to move the runway over instead of leaving it where it is. But they might be perfectly fine with doing that and, following that different track. I think that we probably should be planning the space saving for the terminal as if the runway is going to stay right where it is and the taxiway is moving over. But if we are doing that, I'm wondering what happens then if the runway actually does end up being moved over for whatever reason. Would the terminal be a little bit pushed closer to the highway and the automobile parking rearranged? Would that all still work? It would mean there would be a bigger tarmac between there and the taxiway, but maybe that's a desirable thing. I want to pose that question.
It would be a pretty significant, I think, realignment on what's happening. That east side is very packed with activities, and so if by pushing the terminal farther back into the parking areas, we're taking up ramp space. So if we put the terminal there, I think we will still have taken up some of the ramp space on the east side. I think we haven't really run that scenario, Steve, where we move the terminal back to accommodate an east side taxiway move and then move the runway. What happens with the ramp space? So we probably need to spend a little bit more time looking at that, but I do think that would be a significant challenge just because of, see if we've got the, what happens when you move the terminal further to the east is particularly this vehicle parking that's in purple right now takes up some of the ramp space on the east side, and that along with the ICAO parking is what was driving the need for the west side.
There may be the opportunity where the existing terminal is at, if it does happen to move, the runway moves, we may be able to make up that space a little bit where the current terminal is at when it's raised and cleared.
Or the de-icing ramps. Yeah. So we need more time on that, Steve. We haven't analyzed that option.
Yeah, in my mind, I've been trying to just picture all these Lego building blocks. stuck in the places, and where would the Legos be sitting on the ground? Where would the cars be parked? And all of that stuff is what I've been wrestling with in my mind. If we, no matter which option we do, that's the kind of decisions we have to make. So let's see. Well, it's a lot of negotiation with the FAA, obviously, on this, or talking with them, consulting with them, because if we if we do this change and do a modification to the EA, require the future relocation of the tower, and all those questions there's a huge impact with the FAA, and obviously we should start negotiating with them right away if that's the option we're headed for.
Yeah, and Steve, I think the one bullet point, at least that I think Kelly was questioning and maybe requires some more conversation, is the addition of GA parking. The goal that the Vision Committee had laid out was to maintain roughly the same number of total parking spaces, but with the ICAO parking. So maybe we need to go to that next and talk about that in conjunction with this. And you know, the reduction in ramp space on the east side, because you have to use some of that ramp space for vehicle parking as the terminal and de-icing pads move. And so Kelly had brought that up, but I wasn't quite sure where that landed.
I'm happy to argue my point more. So, you know, I would like to see us have accurate data for the FBO operations. You know, we've had to rely on what we see at Eagle and Rifle, and I think we can collect that in-house before laying, you know, more greenhouse gas emitting concrete anywhere. And I just wonder about the transition of operations to air taxi. You know, are we seeing a shift there? And so that the amount of parking actually the need for parking may start to reduce because of the increase in air taxi. Maybe that's not a good question. You know, maybe there's some false construct to that question, but that's something I wonder about.
One thought I have had, John, would be for automobile parking. And if we, no matter which way, I guess it could work, no matter which plan we go with, but the land across the highway where we have the solar farm scheduled for in the layout plan, if we put long-term, sort of long-term airport parking there, or rental car overflow place where they store cars, put a roof over it and put solar panels on the roof, the view from the highway would be of a solar farm. There would actually be cars parked underneath the solar farm. And that would be a possible way we could reduce the land pressure on the east side for car parking, just by putting some of it over the other side of the highway. And we could still have the solar farm there. I think that would be worth looking at as a possibility.
Yeah, and I know that's something that came up in the focus group meetings, and at that time we were trying to stay within the at least boundaries of the EA, and so that is a possibility that could be included as the board considers a new airport layout plan.
Yeah, and I think in light of Ellie's question, that frees up more ramps, you know, parking for the ICAO parking by doing that, I think, and then maybe reduces the need, or maybe eliminates the need for the west side parking.
So this kind of goes together, I think. So I just thought I'd bring up number 5, which is way out of order here, but I think we deferred it early on in the process to bring it in alignment with the runway discussions. And so there's really a few recommendations in here. One is to reconfigure the GA ramp space to ensure that the larger GA and air taxis are moved a little bit farther to the north. And this was targeted specifically at reducing the impacts, the greater impacts that these aircraft present to the North 40 neighbors. In addition, there's a desire to provide electric and temperate air hookups at those parking spaces so that APUs don't have to run. And again, the idea would be those would be electrical. Hopefully, as we move into the future, more and more run off of renewable sources of electricity and reducing overall greenhouse gas, but also emissions impacts on the neighbors. The ICAO parking was linked in there both from a safety perspective to ensure adequate circulation for firefighting and rescue vehicles, as well as just having that structure helps with the plugins for tempered air and planning that infrastructure. Right now, and I know our FBO does not like it when we use this aircraft parking kind of method, but it's really a compliment to how skilled they are moving these large aircrafts and fitting them in. But they're able, obviously, to fit a lot more aircraft into the existing ramp space, being able to do that without the ICAO parking. As well as with the potential reduction in parking. And so the Vision Committee was very concerned, and this is, Kelly, going back to the point that you're raising, that if the number of parking spaces were reduced, that it would increase the number of drop and goes that the community would likely experience. And so they made the recommendation to build additional ramp space with all of these requirements in place, with the goal of maintaining the same number, roughly the same number of parking spaces, with the ability to expand parking if analysis suggested that would further reduce drop and goes and the impacts that those flights have. Kelly, I think what I heard you saying is, well, maybe we need more analysis to know whether less ramp space or fewer parking spaces actually cause that impact, if I understood correctly.
Steve? Steve, I have a
Patty.
question. Yeah, revenue generation from parking. If we have more planes that don't drop and go, stop and go, drop and go, they have a tendency to fuel more here, rather than if they fly to Rifle and park there and fuel there. That's a revenue for I'm not looking at just as a moneymaker, but as part of how we're paying for things out there. And then, do they have a parking fee? Does that go to us or to FBO?
So the parking fees and such would go to the FBO, and then revenues would flow to us based on our agreement. So there'd be fuel flowage fees, there'd be rental fees, potentially revenue share kind of opportunities. It's important for the board to know that our current FBO agreement expires in 2023, and so it's our anticipation that we'll be going out for bid, and that will be a renegotiated agreement. Obviously, some of the ramp space and facilities affects the value of that lease arrangement. Yeah.
Kelly, did you want to tag on to that? 'Cause
Yeah.
I have another, okay,
Yeah.
I have another question.
Is it the agreement with the FBO that binds them to using the ICAO parking? I don't
Yeah,
want to
that,
create more parking space and then just have them jam all that in, jam it in more.
yeah, no,
Okay.
that's something that we would get to control in our relationship. Obviously, that's not where we are right now with use of that space, but yeah, that would be part of our contracting and lease agreements.
And that's a good segue from my next question, which was about the ICAO parking, because I see that as a huge benefit for what we want to do for noise pollution and emissions pollution. So it really reduces those impacts significantly when you have the plug-ins, the APUs, and the electrical tempered air hookups at each, which would mean you'd have to have designated parking places. So I think that, to me, that benefit outweighs the impact of less parking on that side, because that's one of our main goals, is the reduction of those two issues. And we would like to do that sooner than later, the noise and the emissions issues. So that's why I would be supportive of the ICAO, and I like Kelly's position of reserving the space across, getting some more information to evaluate. Even if we had parking over there, how much would we need? How much impact would that be? And in talking with people who fly locally, small planes, or have used our airport for many, many years, a lot of locals, the safety issue of crossing, the amount of planes, that's another thing. How many of those local planes come and go per day? I think it's not significant. But
Average
that's
is about
another
10.
number, maybe 10-ish, maybe, on an average. So that's another thing to look at as far as the safety of that crossing. But those are numbers we can get, I think, from the FBO, which would be more information I think we need.
And air traffic control will weigh in heavily on
Yeah.
that. They probably have the
Because they're
best
the one who would be
information.
managing the
Yep.
crossing.
Can we add a point here to collect the baseline data?
And add another bullet to this section? Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Under section 5, to put in, collect baseline data from FBO and Tower regarding GA use at the airport. Parking on the ground, GA, not.
Yeah, and you know, the challenge, and one of the reasons we went to neighboring airports, and the analysis, I think, is in our binders here, is that we've always understood we've had constrained ramp space at high periods, you know, and so the ramp space would only affect operations on those days of the year that the ramp space is actually full. And so we can provide that information. What we're trying to evaluate, we can certainly evaluate the number of air taxis. It's a little bit more difficult to know their schedules, and that's one of the reasons we tried to look at similarly situated airports like Eagle that are not resource constrained on those same busy days, to see what the difference, you know, if there was a difference in trend and in drop and goes, to try and estimate what we were doing. But we can certainly, I think if this is getting into a design element to a certain degree, and so I think if the goal is clear, to reduce the number of drop and goes that are required because of infrastructure, we can continue to do that analysis and bring that back. Because if we find that West Side is not required, that makes the project a lot cheaper and frankly a lot easier probably for everyone to accept. If we continue to do that analysis and our goal is the same, I think what we need agreement on from the board is the goal. We've defined a how, because we assume that with reduced ramp space, you know, the vision committee was considering, you know, what are the benefits of ICAO parking, what issues did they see? And they wanted to be sure that any vision document took account of those issues appropriately for the community. So if the board agrees with the goal, that would be the first step, you know, to try and reduce the number of drop and goes that are resulting from not enough parking spaces. And then we can continue to do that analysis as to how many parking spaces might we need, and bring that back to the board as part of the design. But having that goal out there and having that potential solution, if that's where the board wants to go with leaving the runway where it is, that gives us enough basis to start having the conversations with our federal partners.
I think Kelly may be going where I was going, but go, yeah.
Okay, I think that's a worthy goal. I think we may need to wordsmith here, because the way I read the point is we're getting into the how of
Right.
maintaining current numbers, adding adding more. So I would recommend that we reword that to focus on the goal and, allow, I think, more design options to get there.
You're looking at the bullet point, maintain current number?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be consistent too with what Steve brought up about alternative parking for vehicles that may be able to be used for
Right.
ramp space.
Steve, I have another addition there.
Yeah, Patty.
Yeah, the last bullet point, analyze addition of hangars. Lots of pros and cons on that. Having been here when we did the patio hangars many years ago, the visual impacts for people driving by, neighbors and et cetera. But they also allow space for more solar. We could start putting that on all those roofs. So, yeah, that would be something interesting too to see, because it says, see if that would reduce the number of drop and goes. But so we need to weigh that pros and cons.
Maybe roll that into
Yeah.
all the
Bring it all in
options.
there. Yeah, because the pros and cons of putting more patio shelters, hangars would have a huge visual impact, and I don't think would be acceptable to the community. Patio shelters were a big issue of contention for a while there, and they had a kind of a minimal visual impact. So to put in a formal hangar would be an interesting point to talk to the community about.
Yeah, and so I think if, it sounds like there's general agreement on the goal.
Yeah.
Goal isn't necessarily more particularly unnecessary operations. I think the question is the solution. I think the vision committee needed to see that there was a solution that was possible in a layout plan, should that ramp space be required. That was important for them to understand in order to support that option.
To reserve that space over there and the amenities that are needed as
Yeah.
part of that parking space.
But the goal was the important piece.
Okay, George first and then Greg.
Yeah, I'm okay with this. I might have missed something, but John, I thought that currently the majority of the hangars, and not all of them, are being utilized by locals, smaller aircraft, and that if we were going to utilize the west side for hangars, that would actually go for the locals again, because we want the larger aircraft not to have to cross the field.
That's correct, George. And so to reduce the drop and goes, you may need that hangar space on the east side. We haven't totally evaluated that yet.
Yeah, but you'd have, majority probably would be on the west side.
Of the patio
terms of-
shelter type facilities, absolutely, yeah.
In terms of visual impacts. Yeah, okay.
Okay, Greg.
Steve? Yeah, hi. I'm just thinking that we certainly don't want to get into designing yet, but what I think we really need to do is make sure we have flexibility regarding space available for parking, and implement it when it's needed and not sooner. Just looking at an article that came across my desk regarding a futuristic concept that's hard to grasp, and that's flying cars and taxis. Hyundai, Airbus, Boeing, several other companies are already in production of prototypes. They've got flying models. They're talking about 2023 being the debut of some flying cars, while 2028 is when they'll be up and rolling in mass production. They're talking about building hundreds of thousands of them. Auto manufacturers are going to be getting into this, according to the people who are following this. So what this possibly could mean is we may need to accommodate an air taxi that goes to somebody's house and picks them up and brings them to the airport, for instance. So along with general aviation, along with the needs for, that we're talking about, we may see new elements in the airline industry in about 10 years, which is about what we're looking at for reconfiguring the airport. So I think we want to be flexible. I'm having trouble imagining this becoming real, but Uber's talking about making them all autonomous by 2035. So all of a sudden, we may need a place to park these things if they're delivering people to an airport for a longer flight, for instance. Just thought, hard to imagine it, but I think we should be prepared for it.
We're going from the Flintstones to the Jetsons.
And we're doing it right here
Yep.
at this meeting today.
Well, if you don't like
I've
congestion in
thought about
2D,
that.
wait till it's 3D.
I mean, those things are coming. Vertical takeoff and landing, air taxi, drone kind of things they're going to be here in 10 years probably. I have no doubt. And where are they? They probably can't interfere with the airspace around the airport at all, given the current rules. And where are they going to land? Do we need to build a whole separate landing place somewhere else in the community for these things to come in and out of?
The bigger question
I don't
is,
know.
yeah, the bigger
it's
question
an
is, can they
intriguing
fly in
and
mountain
really-
terrain?
It is going to be a challenge because regardless, certainly our airport land is highly constrained. That's part of the struggle that we're operating with, and it's already very close into city of Aspen, fairly close to Snowmass Village. It's not a DIA kind of situation where we're out in the plains with nothing but land. And so obviously we'll have to watch these developments, understand how they're being regulated. It is not clear to me that, is that a FAA issue? Is it a Department of Transportation issue? How are these things really going to be operating, and how will they be adopted? And so, as a community, we're absolutely going to have to continue to adjust, and I suspect this community will have a robust discussion about how appropriate it is to expand kind of air taxi types of services because of the visual and other impacts they're likely to have on the community. So I think that's going to be a whole nother future discussion as we learn more.
Something for Patty in her 7th or 8th term can be dealing with that.
I don't think I'm gonna be around long enough to see drone airplane service in downtown Aspen, Colorado.
So it sounds to me, though.
Barely have Uber.
On the ground.
It does sound to me that on number 13, the board has largely at least reached direction, maybe not full consensus, with the exception of changing the last bullet point to note the overall goal of not increasing the number of GA operations due to drop and goes that are caused by facility deficiencies. We'll word that better.
Does that
But
Does that mean you're combining 5 with 13?
yeah, because we kind of had it in this last bullet point. I think that's where Kelly, you were identifying it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to come back to 5 then and flow into that. And that we relate the goals of doing that, and that we would explore the options, whether that's more ramp space, realignment of our vehicle parking space, potentially across Highway 82, whatever that wants to be in the design process as we move forward. We would also then, it sounded like there was general agreement with moving towards the ICAO parking standards, understanding that the issue is it's less efficient on the ramp space, just pure parking space usage, but has benefits for safety and also being able to achieve our environmental goals through the electricity and plug-ins. And it sounded to me, although I don't know that we've gotten the thumbs up yet, that the board was generally in agreement with moving that direction.
I'm definitely there.
Me
Okay.
too. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. There's, the noise reduction, the pollution reduction are directly tied to that. The cost by ground, the stuff we're doing on the ground. I think that's important.
Okay. And this is not necessarily what a design would look like. We were just fitting in, a visual. So, construction phasing. Rich, can I pivot to you on this one?
Sure. The board has been talking about the timing of construction, and early on in the discussions, I think there was agreement that whatever you do, you were going to minimize the community disruption while the constructing phasing of the various, the terminal, the airfield, and the land site improvements. And I think Kelly hit on that when she was talking about the runway location. By leaving it where it is, or by moving it, actually is more disruptive to the community from a financial standpoint because of closures. So I think we captured that desire from the board here. And then we had talked earlier, and I think John has talked to this, is that this is a vision document, that the timing of the projects, we can come back to you based on technical requirements, funding, and then certainly consideration of the new aircraft. And that was discussed today as well. Case in point is just what you agreed on. You agreed on the goal for the ICAO parking. And our phasing plan kind of showed it happening all at once. We build the west side, and then all of a sudden we do the ICAO on the east side. That can be done incrementally. To start meeting the goals of emissions, and also start putting in place some of the electrical improvements without having to build that other side. So to that point, I think where we're at from a staff standpoint is the vision document talks about a phasing approach that really does kind of work its way up. We take care of some of the items before we get to the terminal. The terminal was part of their phase construction about midway through, and then the runway was to the last, or was the end. And I think we can still meet those. However, the board has talked about speeding up, the terminal construction in some fashion. So I guess that's where we're at from a standpoint of either we make that decision today on kind of your timing of those, because I know, Patty, you've had a lot of energy around that, and just having the board discuss that, or we kind of go with the approach that has been laid out with the vision committee, knowing that we've got to analyze it more and then come back with maybe some little more details on phasing.
Steve?
Patty?
Yeah, thank you, Rich. I do believe that we need to really be focused on the terminal for many reasons. I just have a hard time putting more Band-Aids on it. It costs us a lot of money to do that. Just the working space and the traveler space is just not acceptable. I've said that before. I won't go into it in detail. But also the dollar value. The longer we wait, because more of that money we have to come up with on our own, and the dollar value for years out, we know construction costs will continue to go up. So I would really like to focus our energies there, along with what we can do as far as the environmental issues, the noise pollution, emissions pollution, whatever we can do there. But it's just as quickly as we can. I know that doesn't mean quickly necessarily. Move forward into the next steps looking at a terminal.
Mm-hmm. And I think what I'm hearing and what I've heard consistently is that all things being equal, or if feasible, financially or from just a phasing kind of perspective, that the board would prefer to accelerate the terminal over other improvements that are being considered. but that we still need to do some more analysis to
Right.
understand those pieces. But it seems to be the clear intent that the sooner we can get the terminal done feasibly, that seems to be the board's, there seems to be agreement amongst the board that that's a goal.
That's my position. The other thing I think is really exciting about a new terminal, we have such a gift in this community of creativity, both architecturally and just visionary. I think we can come up with a terminal that we can all be extremely proud of, that really sets a pace for other areas around this country, around the world, because we have visitors from around the world. That can get here and see this amazing space that we've come up with, both functionable, environmentally sustainable, et cetera. And I'm excited to start working in that direction on something I think we can really gather community-wide support for and move it forward. So that's a positive in my mind.
Kelly?
I agree with Patty, but I want to raise a point of caution that I'm still not clear on. And that is there a scenario where we can begin construction on the terminal without having locked us into an ADG3 runway? Given that the airport layout plan sort of connects our ability to start on a terminal and locks us into that runway.
Yeah, and I really,
The tough one.
you know, for the ramps and all, there is a lot of funding, I think, Kelly. I think it's a reasonable caution. I think there's a lot of infrastructure that we typically leverage, those FAA grants, and we should be designing those facilities in tandem, right, to work together. So I have a hard time seeing where you move forward with accepting those grants without having committed to a larger project.
Right.
So,
That's what I thought. So, you know, I just want our board to be very clear on how those timing is connected, and that we are faced with a trade-off of pursuing the terminal that we all want with prematurely committing to the airside layout that we know we need more information from the airlines and the FAA before we can commit to.
Well, I'm going to respond, and I agree, caution is always wise. But I think, and I'm just saying this because that's what I think, whether it's true or not, that we can still retain some flexibility in the future with the runway. If there's a dramatic change in technology in aviation or in FAA standards, modification of standards, et cetera, I think that door will still be open for us. Even if we do move forward with the terminal, I think we'll be able to adapt to that in the future.
and I
Positive
can't say
over you.
one way or another. I just wanted to project for the board
Yeah.
that it's very possible that as we accept grants for that infrastructure around, that
Yeah,
will.
but I think we need to hopefully keep that positive side, that if the new information and, like I said, technology, regulatory issues really change, which I think we will definitely see some changes, but the magnitude we don't know, and the specifics we don't really know. But I think that'll allow us the opportunity to be able to think again, because we keep seeming to be able to think again on this.
Okay, I think we've captured that conversation. Is there more? So, I think we might have oh geez, sorry. The airport layout plan then proposed by the Common Ground recommendations. This would be a starting point. I think some of the conversation today has been around whether a space reservation where the solar farm is currently anticipated. May also absorb some of the vehicle parking in the space reservation. I think that's a discussion that we could flesh out as part of our ALP discussions. And then the other piece was spending more time analyzing the drop and go traffic that would affect maybe the necessity or timing and phasing of when West Side Taxiway would be necessary. And these two may be interrelated. Those would be options that, as we're looking at an airport layout plan, we could dive in more detail with the board. Essentially, though, I think the remainder of what is on the airport layout plan as proposed in the common ground recommendation reflects the discussion that the board has had to this point. And so we'd be noting, I think, adding notes on those areas right now. And it'd really be these three major areas that I'm putting my cursor around. And I can tell we're getting tired and losing focus here.
No, I'm just getting wound up. I'm just getting going.
Really?
Well, good, Patty, you have a long day.
I know, I gotta roll. I gotta roll all day.
So, yeah, I mean, ironically, as the person who's sort of most reserved about the West Side parking, I also just want to note, we had conversations about a possible West Side taxiway, whether we should include that here or not, and that may be dependent on, what the FAA assessment is of the crossings, the safety of the crossings. So I just want to put that out as, for me, at least, an outstanding question, and whether we include that here or not. But otherwise, I don't think that I don't have any deviations from what's presented here.
An airport layout plan rarely survives all the conversations it has to go through in its original form. But those, and I say that a little bit in jest, but also to note that those are exactly the types of conversations that'll happen in that space reservation process. So,
Yeah, and those were the two things that I saw too, that the West Side Taxiway, where going to the north and the south, both directions, are possibilities. And I think the negotiation discussion with the FAA determines a lot of that. Maybe we want to put in dotted lines there on what we take to them, to, that's things that we discuss, their possibilities. We need to see what the FAA says before we really can make up our mind. They might make it up for us.
That's certainly something we can bring up in the conversations.
One other thing I know it was discussed, having the underground, the pedestrian underpass by the ABC coming in directly into an underground parking area right next to the terminal. And I don't know, I can't make out the parking situation and the circulation there by the terminal. And I don't know how much that has to be part of the airport layout plan, but is that reflected in parking? I don't have my bigger map with me today, but
yeah. So Steve, it's actually not, and it's consistent with the focus group recommendations to make sure that transit or shared ride services are the first options that are available as you're coming out of the terminal. And so the space between the terminal and 82s you come out is really reserved for transit and covered walkways and such to make that access as easy as possible and to encourage that as a first option. The single occupancy vehicle parking is actually pushed farther out as a less convenient option for folks to use. And so there was conversation at one time about having the underground parking, you're correct, and having that connected directly to the underpass. As the focus group and vision committee were going through that, they wanted to be sure that the space reservation represented the goals of transit and public transportation being the easiest and first choice. The other piece that has affected us in the past is, as you all have mentioned, changing technologies. We expect that the changing technologies like autonomous vehicles and electrification and such is going to happen with automobiles first. And there's a lot of concern about bonding over a 20-year period to build an expensive parking structure that may or may not be in that same world 20 years from now with single occupancy vehicles. That's a big question mark, and that is starting to affect how people are looking at financing those types of parking structures. And so that weighed in our conversations also.
Yeah, we could have the situation where nobody owns their own vehicle. They would just have a autonomous vehicle. They would order one and it would come by to the airport when they need it, and they would take them to their destination or something like that. Might be the technology in 20 years, in which case we wouldn't have a need for the parking. Now, thinking as a down valley person, when we ride when we want to go to the airport and we have to take our own car, it presents an issue. If you live in Aspen and can take the public transit really easily, it's one situation. For a down valley person, where you have to take your car and leave it somewhere in a RAPTA parking lot where they don't allow overnight parking, at one of the park and rides up and down the valley, or you need to drive to the airport in a car and leave it there, you're making it inconvenient for a certain part of the population of the county who don't live conveniently next to transit. And so I think this is a disincentive for those people to even use the airport. They would somehow, maybe try to find some other way to get where they're going. Just I want to put that thought out there. George?
Oh, I was going to say it's about 11:30. We should try to move through this.
So I think we've captured some, additional comments. Oh,
I'm going to jump in with a question. Just regarding the air traffic control tower, does this lock us into anything, or are we still able to have broad, imaginative conversations about the best place for the tower, whether it be on-site or off-site?
yeah, no, I don't think it locks us in to a structure. I think we need to be able to show that we have a space reservation that would work for it if the FAA were not to approve virtual towers or something in the future. Frankly, I think our first option would be not to have a structure, but to leverage these emerging technologies. And in fact, in the airport layout plan, we actually, while we show a space reservation, we're also showing a temporary operating kind of modification that would allow the current tower to stay in use until one of those future options is figured out. It may make more sense to have a room associated with our terminal or a space reservation in our terminal for virtual towers and such. And we hope over the next couple of years, as we're having these discussions, the FAA's programming on that is going to become more clear.
Thank you.
Anything else? We're on our last one. And basically, and the board may have already answered this, I think the Vision Committee welcomes the opportunity to be brought back to advise the board throughout the process. Patty, as you pointed out, that may flip to an airport advisory board, which is a recommendation that is made also by the Vision Committee and earlier. But I do think the people that were involved in the vision process put in a tremendous amount of time. There was we did have attrition, but we had a tremendous number of people putting in hours and hours over the course of a year, every week, into this discussion. And so I think there's a high degree of investment amongst those folks, and would like to be continue to be involved as decisions are made by the board. And so that's really I think the ask of the Vision Committee in this case.
George?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that per se, although it sort of leaves out all the other task force committees. So somehow, they put in a lot of time and they provide the input that the Vision Committee looks at, right? So I guess I would suggest that we would utilize some sort of communication that would go out to all the members that participated through all the task forces. Not that we would want to re-engage everybody again, but at least be able to involve them all at least with information, and then perhaps the advisory, if and when we set up an airport advisory committee, then that becomes more of the focal point for input.
Steve, I agree with George on that. Just do electronic communication, have them submit any comments. Once we get what we're calling, what's the next, our consolidation of the BOCC recommendations, send that out just for their information. If they have any specifics or have a contact point or person, and just to let them know that we really seriously looked at all of this information, all of this input, and went through every word of the Common Ground recommendation. I mean, we really did. And let them know that, highlight the changes, anything that we might have done differently or added to. And just to let them know that, we'd like to hear what they have to say, and that before we move it on to a formal adoption. To give them the opportunity.
There are some questions hanging out there that have been brought forward by the community. One would be the whole privatization idea. Another would be the conflict. Well, the one committee wanted to have, they didn't like the flex gate idea, I think, and then the Vision Committee came up with a flex gate idea. Those kind of questions, do we want to have an airport advisory committee look at some of those issues or not? Just putting the question out there, that could be one of their tasks, that they could take a look at things that, bear looking at in more detail.
Well, we'd have to have an airport advisory committee
And
in order to do that.
I do like the idea of having airport advisory committees. I would recommend doing that. I think that's a good idea.
And that is definitely something the board supported.
Greg?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good, well, your hand up.
Are you looking for a yes or a no on that, Steve?
No, I was
I
just
think
tossing
yes.
the idea out as, you know, there are some things that I don't think we have time to adequately really dig into some of the ideas that have been put out there by members in the community.
I would agree, and I think that,
You know, doing our kind of a slow approach to this, we will have time, or the BOCC will have time to look at some of the things as we go along, but I guess I'm looking at what is the role of the Airport Advisory Committee going forward, provided that we do that.
Steve, Greg here. I would just say that I think it's important. We'd be remiss not to consider that information, and if it makes sense to have a committee appointed to do that, if reconvening this committee is the right way to go, I think it sounds good to me. But I do think it's necessary that we hear all that we can, given the time we have now to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And for instance, I was watching the grassroots thing with Amory Lovins and Tom Keogh this morning, and, you know, contemplating some of their things they were talking about. I didn't finish looking at it yet. There's a lot of food for thought there. Just as an example, that's one group who has some ideas they'd like us to listen to. So John, where do we go? Are we going to now take a short break and grab some quick lunch and then come back and try to go through the 15 goals and see if our summary is what we had envisioned?
We
Is
only
that the
have a
plan
half
for
an
today?
hour.
Yeah, so I know we're gonna start losing members, I believe at noon, Steve, and so, you know, if we need a 5-minute break, we can do this a couple of ways. I think we can distribute the bullet point list to board members individually, have any questions flagged. You know, the wordsmithing is going to come later in the process when you finalize. We want to be sure we've captured all the thoughts, because I do think going back through all of them is going to take more than half an hour, even without a lot of discussion. And so I might suggest that we distribute and just see if there's some common themes in terms of concerns or items we may have missed. We've certainly tried to capture these discussions.
Can I suggest, is it possible to?
Yeah, Kelly and then Greg.
Okay. Is it possible maybe to do that during open discussion next Wednesday? We currently have a pretty light meeting next Wednesday. And so if we,
Well, we
put this
could,
on the agenda as an open discussion item, we might be able to.
and we
that
could
done.
actually just post it, not even as an open discussion, just post it as an item to finish up this discussion on Wednesday if the board's open to that.
However, we need to properly notice it, a difference from our regular meeting, so, because it's kind of
Right.
a work session.
It's a work session,
Yeah,
and
add it
Wednesday, oh, that's right, Wednesday is a light regular
Regular
meeting,
session.
so
Yeah.
we need to, thank you, Patty.
Just
I
to
keep
make
thinking we bumped everything a day.
Yeah, and it's a crazy week next week.
Would the
Yeah.
board be open to that?
I don't have a problem with that at all. Unless staff adds
I'm
5
good
more
with that.
land use items to our agenda
Yeah.
for next Wednesday.
We'll start at 8:30.
Or any.
Let's see, I don't know, can't
After
remember. I don't
election
think
night. Yeah, right.
George, why don't you go ahead? I can't remember if I called somebody else too. George, go ahead.
I don't have a problem with that, John. I was just going to ask, are we going to look at sort of future agenda meetings? Because when I looked at the future agendas this morning, November 4th, at this point, there are no land use items, so this is easy for us to have that discussion. November 10th, if we want to utilize that time for public input or whatever, we could start at 9. November 17th is open, and November 18th, there are no land use items. So just trying to schedule how we're going to try to wrap this up with perhaps two reads, and if the board still wants to have a public meeting prior to that, it seems like we could get this done relatively soon, given what's on the current future agendas.
Yeah, and so that we were planning on talking about that, George, and that may be the best use of our remaining time. Facilities have been a challenge. The Limelight and Aspen is available. The Meadows is closed. A lot of the typical places that we would look for a larger venue for an in-person opportunity for speakers are closed. So we have identified the Limelight and Aspen as a opportunity. They are not available November 12th, 19th, or 20th. I think you'd thrown out November 10th, George. Is that correct?
Well, we have a budget meeting that starts at 10:30, but if we could start at 9, we could be done earlier that day, I'm sure.
George, are you talking about a public input meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can't.
Right, and you have a public.
So that would probably, I think what George is suggesting is if we ended the work session earlier, then we could relocate to another venue and do a public input. We found that 4 to 6, 4 to 7 is a time that we can capture a number of folks for those types of venues. So, Rich, I'm sorry.
John, you may also, I don't know whether you've looked at other venues, but you may look at the Hotel Jerome, the ballroom, or even the Ritz-Carlton downstairs, those large rooms, actually larger, both larger than the Limelight. And I'm assuming we're going to Zoom this as well, so it's a combination. So given the response we had at the Meadows last time, which was fairly minimum, I would suspect we see sort of the same players all over again. So
We also have the 12th reserved, though, for our Aspen Airport meeting. It's on my schedule. Remember
there wasn't a facility, so the Limelight. And George, I do think, and Rich, I'm not sure if Sandra looked at those other venues too.
No, she hasn't yet. Those are good suggestions, George. I think the Limelight was an option for us. It looks like you can get 59 people in, given that they're set up. And they do have a COVID plan in place already. The others may, but we can certainly check into them.
But it is not available on the 12th, so we could look at these other venues to see if they're available.
The 12th was not a great day for me.
That's right. Thank you.
So if we could do it on that Tuesday and just work around our current.
It'll be a long day.
Well, we're getting used to that. A short day, I don't know what to do with ourselves.
Okay, so if the board is open to it, we'll look at a venue on the 10th for public follow-up. We will come back to you. We'll try and get a work session posting for Wednesday afternoon to finish up these slides and make sure that we've captured the changes, and we will back in then, George, to your point, on a first reading based on that public hearing date.
Great.
I think that is all we have for you this morning. Thank you. You got through the challenging ones. Hopefully We've captured those. I do think at our public comment period, we'll probably have more participation as we give the folks who participated in the vision process the board's recommendations. I think they'll view that as the time to weigh in, and so I think we'll probably have a larger and more diverse group participating. And I just think there's been a lot of interest since we've kicked off your review of the Vision Committee's recommendations. So
Was the plan for 5 minutes too, to allow a little more time?
yeah, so we'll take board direction on that. There were different options thrown out, but it seemed like 5 minutes for public comment was generally where the board landed.
And we would really, if people want to submit things in writing, you know, we need to make sure that they have that opportunity too. I mean, all of the above.
You know, we were pretty heavily criticized after the last meeting having ended so early that folks who may have wanted to have more time be allowed to have more time. So, you know, I would be okay to revisit that if folks, you know, tagged on again at the end to make further remarks, but I think the board needs to decide that.
George?
Yeah, you know, you give someone more time, you can give, I know at least one person, you can give that person an hour, and they would still be going on. So I think 5 minutes is ample. I don't see that someone can give up their time for someone else. That's a bad ploy. And I think one of the challenges, though, John, will be that if we're going to have in conjunction in person and Zoom, how to coordinate that and sort of be able to flip back and forth.
Yeah, that's going to be, no doubt that's going to be a little bit of a challenge, so we'll have to work on those logistics.
Yeah.
We have lots of lessons learned this year to draw on.
Mike's the best at those Zoom meetings now, so we got him covered.
I don't know. I'll just say, you know, this isn't like this is a very broad policy impact and not just kind of like a land use topic that has a more narrow application. So I would continue to just encourage broader opportunity for public input.
And I think there will be plenty of time down the road. This is not like the one and only time, right, Kelly? As we talked about this process
Maybe I'm
this
just
morning,
wishing it would be.
this is going to be an ongoing discussion for not weeks, not months, but years.
I would encourage public comment to be allowed at both first and second readings of the resolution too. You can comment in the first or the second, but we don't want to hear the same comments first and second. But that way, people who can't make it to the second can comment at the first read. When we get to that point, I'll bring that up again.
I like that idea. Great. Craig?
Yeah, I think that, you know, information may come to light that you can't be disseminated in 5 minutes. And I want to make sure that if a presentation comes before us, we have at least the opportunity to determine whether or not it's worth a longer hearing. So I certainly would appreciate having public comment more often in both meetings, as Patty suggests. And I'd like us to find a way to be able to vet, you know, if somebody wants to come and rant for 20 minutes, that's not acceptable. But if somebody has a half an hour, a team of people come and they bring us a half-hour presentation, I think this is too important to close that down. So if there's some way we can vet the information or filter it through a relevancy filter, I would support that, because I can imagine there's a lot of detail and a lot of important information that could come to light. And I don't want to miss it because we have a rule that says you have to stop after 5 minutes, say.
Steve,
So I'm wrestling with this.
Steve, can I comment on that?
Patty?
If the board chooses to do that, we have to open it up to everybody, because then we'll be charged with, oh, you vetted it and you didn't vet me into that because you thought I would want to rant for 20 minutes. You know, to be fair with the public, we'd have to allow that time frame for everybody. And I don't know if we're willing to do that. I think people who have a longer presentation, I appreciate some of the efforts that are ongoing in the community. I think that they can submit it in a written form with their slides. The board is really good at reading that stuff and vetting it. And then they can do a synopsis or a summary at a public hearing. But if we open it up and say, well, we choose you but not you, we're going to get challenged by that for being, you know, picking people that we wanted to hear from and not allowing people we didn't want to hear from. And I don't want to get into that quagmire. I don't want to go there.
Okay, I appreciate that, Patty, but I think you've made a good suggestion. If somebody does want to submit the lengthier report and then spend the 5 minutes introducing us to it, that would satisfy me.
Great, thanks, Greg.
I think the written comments submitted in, I mean, it'd be better if they're submitted in time for a packet beforehand, but some people might be handing it to us right then. And I would welcome the written comments. Some people are so knowledgeable about the whole thing, especially those who were involved in the whole process. They might have comments about a number of the different items on there and have really, you know, good points about more than one item. And they're not going to be able to talk about it in 5 minutes, but in a, you know, well-written piece that they handed to us, they could cover all those points.
So it sounds like we're sticking with the 5 minutes, but we'll be encouraging folks with maybe more robust comment and such to submit those in writing, preferably ahead of time, and they can use those 5 minutes to highlight the points that they're making. Did I capture that?
I think so, John. I would say, why can't we require this stuff in advance? If somebody's pushing the last minute deadline, I have less sympathy for them than I do somebody who's coming in advance. It's not like we're pulling any surprises. I think we could announce it publicly, make sure people know about it, and set a deadline for submissions. I'd be willing to go that far so that it's not an afterthought or a last minute thought.
Problem is we're just talking 2 weeks out for this public hearing, so that means staff's got to move pretty quickly on lots of things.
Yeah, I guess you know, I guess if it's public comment, yeah, I guess if it's public comment, people could just comment, and if they have some materials they want to provide to the board prior or even after, that's fine, because we're going to have a 2-read afterwards, and you know, people come into the last minute all the time, but they have 5 minutes, and their comments, their presentations will go into the record regardless. So I don't see the sense or the need in terms of having a timeline when someone has to submit. If they want to comment, they can comment. It will go in the record. And if we get it last minute, we won't have a chance to read it at that time, which happens many times during our land use action items, and we just move on.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I think it would certainly benefit everyone if we announce what we're going to do, so that nobody can say that they didn't know about it, and maybe they'll have the
I think
the foresight to get it done in advance.
Yeah, no, I think that's great to provide that information ahead of time. Absolutely.
Anything else? You're waiting for a thumbs up, John?
So, John, I was looking at my calendar, and on November 10th, Tuesday, November 10th, the Senior Center is holding a virtual town hall to take input. I just want you to be aware that it's scheduled from 4 till 6 o'clock. There could be some, if we were scheduling a public meeting on the airport, then there might be some seniors who would want to be at both of them. And so, I don't know, the airport thing is hugely important. I was supposed to be at the senior center thing as I am available, knowing that I probably wouldn't be there for the whole thing, but I just wanted to put that out there if that could be taken into consideration. If that was our next day to really dive into the airport, we absolutely have to be forging ahead with the airport thing, and I can miss the senior center thing if possible, but then some seniors might miss the airport thing also.
We can ask the seniors that let them know they can submit their comments ahead of time if they want to us. And I think the airport meeting is critically important because if we're gonna move forward with a formal adoption of anything, we need to have this public input sooner than later.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with that, and I just was looking at my calendar and then noticed that, and then I put that in there.
So John, is there anything more?
Okay, are we ready? You think we're ready to break for the day? Any last comments from anybody? We have a meeting later on, don't forget, the BOCC. So we're not done yet for the day.
Hey, John, could you have Dave resend out the Zoom? Because sometimes he sent one out like a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of times it gets outdated, doesn't work. So if we could send out a current Zoom for today's meeting, would it be helpful?
Are you guys doing the OTC?
No, because city's hosting, so.
Oh, cities. Yeah, we'll see. I think the city's hosting this one, George, so yeah, I see who we need to get that from.
Dave should have it.
Yeah, just get a current updated one.
All right,
All right, we'll see you all later.
all right.
See you later.
See you guys at
Thank
4. Greg, I'll
you.
see you at 1.
Thank you, Grassroots.